The familiar aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the cozy bakery, a comforting scent that had greeted me every morning since childhood. As I stepped behind the counter to help my father, Jack, prepare for the day's rush, a pang of nostalgia tugged at my heart. This bakery, a cherished legacy passed down through generations, was more than just a business. It was a sanctuary, a place where the warmth of community and family intertwined. "Morning, sweetheart." Dad greeted me with a warm smile, his hands already dusted with flour from the early morning baking. "Ready for another busy day?" I nodded, tying my apron strings. "You know I am. The Harris Bakery wouldn't be the same without us." Dad chuckled, his eyes crinkling with pride. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Linda. She poured her heart into this place, and now it's our turn to keep her spirit alive." Memories of Mom's infectious laughter and her unwavering dedication to the bakery flooded my mind. Even after she passed away when I was just a teenager, her presence lingered in every nook and cranny, a constant reminder of the love and hard work that built this sanctuary. As the morning rush began, a steady stream of familiar faces filled the bakery, each greeted with a warm smile and a heartfelt exchange. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow from down the street, beamed as I handed her a freshly baked blueberry muffin, her favorite. Little Timmy, the rambunctious kid from the neighborhood, bounced excitedly as Dad slipped him an extra chocolate chip cookie, winking conspiratorially. These were the moments that made every early morning and late night worth it. The connections forged, the sense of belonging that transcended mere transactions. In a world that often felt cold and impersonal, our little bakery was a haven, a place where people could find solace in the simple pleasures of life. As the day wore on, my thoughts drifted to Mark, my husband of 2 years. We had met at the office where we both worked, and from the moment our eyes locked, I knew there was something special between us. His kind eyes and gentle demeanor had captured my heart, and I couldn't help but imagine a future filled with love and laughter by his side. Yet, even in the midst of our blissful union, a shadow loomed, the ever-present specter of Mark's mother, Evelyn. A woman of wealth and social standing, she had never approved of my humble roots or the bakery that meant so much to me. Her cutting remarks and disapproving glances had become a constant source of tension, driving a wedge between Mark and me. "Linda, if you truly loved me, you'd stand up to her." Mark's voice echoed in my mind, choked with frustration, his eyes pleading while my heart trembled between loyalty to my husband and fear of his mother's wrath. As the day drew to a close, and the last customer left with a warm pastry and a grateful smile, I found myself torn between the sanctuary of the bakery and the turmoil brewing in my personal life. But one thing was certain. I would not let Evelyn's disdain diminish the legacy my parents had built or the love that Mark and I shared. With a deep breath, I steeled my resolve, determined to find a way to bridge the divide and protect the things that mattered most. The sound of Evelyn's heels clicking against the hardwood floor announced her arrival before I even saw her. Mark tensed beside me, his hand gripping mine a little tighter as his mother swept into the living room, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer dress a stark contrast to our modest home. "Linda, darling." Evelyn greeted me with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope you're not planning on wearing something so plain for the wedding." I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar prickle of insecurity creep up my spine. "It's just a simple ceremony, Evelyn, nothing too extravagant." Her perfectly arched eyebrow raised ever so slightly, and I could practically hear the disdain dripping from her words. "Surely you don't expect my son to settle for a backyard affair. This is a Bryant wedding, after all." Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me, but before he could speak, Evelyn continued, "I've taken the liberty of booking the country club for the reception. It's a venue befitting our family's stature." My heart sank as I realized she had once again steamrolled over our plans, imposing her vision without regard for our wishes. Mark remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, and I knew he wouldn't challenge his mother's decision. Evelyn's critical eye swept over our modest living room, her nose wrinkling ever so slightly. "I must say, Linda, I had hoped my son would have chosen a more suitable partner, one who could appreciate the finer things in life." Her words cut deep, striking at the very core of my insecurities. I had always taken pride in my humble upbringing and the values instilled by my father's bakery: hard work, community, and a deep appreciation for the simple pleasures in life. But in Evelyn's world, those virtues held no value. "Mother, that's enough." Mark finally spoke up, his voice strained, but Evelyn merely waved him off, her attention already shifting to the next item on her agenda. As she droned on about guest lists and seating arrangements, I felt myself retreating inward, my confidence withering under the weight of her constant criticism. Mark's hand remained limp in mine, a silent acknowledgement of his inability, or unwillingness, to stand up to his mother's overbearing presence. Later that evening, as Mark and I prepared for bed, the tension between us was palpable. I could see the conflict etched on his face, the struggle between his love for me and his deep-rooted fear of defying his mother's wishes. "Linda," he began, his voice heavy with resignation, "I know my mother can be difficult, but she means well in her own way." I fought back the bitter laugh that threatened to escape my lips. Evelyn's actions spoke louder than any well-intentioned words ever could. Her constant belittling, her disregard for our desires, and her relentless pursuit of social status had cast a dark shadow over what should have been one of the happiest times of our lives. "Does she, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained frustration. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like she's more concerned with appearances than our happiness." Mark's shoulders slumped, and I could see the internal battle raging within him. In that moment, I realized that no matter how much he loved me, a part of him would always be tethered to his mother's expectations, her approval a coveted prize he could never quite attain. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, a seed of resentment took root within me. Evelyn's constant undermining had not only threatened my self-worth, but had also driven a wedge between Mark and me. I knew then that I couldn't simply stand by and let her dictate the course of our lives. For the sake of our marriage and my own sense of dignity, I would have to find a way to confront her toxic influence, even if it meant risking the wrath of the formidable Evelyn Bryant. The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, and I knew without even answering that it was Evelyn, her perfectly manicured nails rapping impatiently against the doorframe. Mark shot me an apologetic glance as he rose to greet his mother, his shoulders already tensing in anticipation of her critique. "Linda, darling," Evelyn breezed in, her gaze sweeping over our modest living room with thinly veiled disdain. "I simply had to come by and discuss the guest list for the wedding." Before I could respond, she thrust a thick binder into my hands, the pages overflowing with names and addresses. "I've taken the liberty of inviting a few of my dearest friends and associates. After all, this is a Bryant wedding, and we must maintain a certain level of decorum." My heart sank as I flipped through the pages, recognizing none of the names, a veritable who's who of Evelyn's elite social circle. Gone was any semblance of the intimate gathering Mark and I had envisioned, replaced by a grandiose affair designed to showcase Evelyn's status and connections. "Evelyn, I appreciate your input, but Mark and I had hoped for something a bit more personal," I began, my voice wavering slightly under her steely gaze. "Nonsense, dear," she waved her hand dismissively. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We simply must do it properly." Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me, his silence a deafening testament to his unwillingness to challenge his mother's authority. I could feel the frustration building within me, a simmering resentment at the way Evelyn steamrolled over our wishes, treating our wedding as a mere extension of her own social ambitions. "But what about my family and friends?" I pressed on, my voice growing stronger. "Shouldn't they be included as well?" Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched ever so slightly, and I could practically hear the disdain dripping from her words. "Surely you don't expect to invite those common folk to such an esteemed occasion." The insult stung like a slap in the face, and I felt Mark tense beside me, his jaw clenching as he struggled to find the words to defend me. But before he could speak, Evelyn continued, her tone laced with condescension. "Darling, I'm only trying to ensure that this wedding reflects the Bryant family's standing in society. We can't have your little bakery friends cluttering up the guest list, now can we?" The air seemed to crackle with tension as her words hung between us, and I could feel the anger bubbling up within me, threatening to boil over. How dare she dismiss the very people who had been my rock, my support system, throughout my life? The loyal customers and cherished friends who had celebrated my triumphs and comforted me in my darkest moments, reduced to mere clutter in Evelyn's eyes. "That's enough, Mother," Mark finally spoke up, his voice strained but resolute. "Linda's family and friends are just as important as yours. This is our wedding, and we'll invite whoever we choose." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her perfectly painted lips pursing in disapproval. "Mark, darling, you can't be serious. These people are beneath us, and their presence will only serve to diminish the grandeur of the occasion." The words hung in the air like a slap, and I could feel the anger and hurt radiating from Mark as he struggled to maintain his composure. In that moment, I realized the true depth of Evelyn's disdain, not just for me, but for everything and everyone that didn't conform to her elitist ideals. As Evelyn continued to prattle on about seating arrangements and floral arrangements, her voice droning on like a persistent buzz, I felt a newfound resolve taking root within me. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, a celebration of love and commitment, but Evelyn had twisted it into a twisted display of social climbing and one-upmanship. I would not stand idly by and let her trample over our dreams, our values, any longer. If Mark couldn't find the strength to stand up to his mother, then I would have to take matters into my own hands. The seeds of a plan began to germinate in my mind, a silent vow to reclaim our wedding and our lives from Evelyn's toxic grip. The familiar chime of the bakery's bell greeted me as I stepped inside, the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread instantly calming my frayed nerves. As I made my way behind the counter, exchanging warm greetings with the regulars, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. This was my sanctuary, a place where Evelyn's toxic influence held no sway. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Dad's voice broke through my reverie, his brow furrowed with concern. "You seem a bit distracted today." I forced a smile, not wanting to burden him with the weight of my troubles. "Just wedding stress," I replied, hoping the half-truth would suffice. Dad's expression softened, and he reached out to give my hand a gentle squeeze. "Don't let that woman get you down, Linda. This is supposed to be a happy time for you and Mark." I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. If only he knew the extent of Evelyn's meddling, her relentless efforts to mold our wedding into a gaudy display of her own social standing. As the day wore on, and the familiar faces of our loyal customers streamed in and out, I found myself seeking solace in their warm smiles and friendly banter. These were the people who truly mattered, the ones who had been there for me through thick and thin, long before Evelyn's toxic presence had entered our lives. It was then that a seed of an idea began to take root in my mind. If Evelyn was determined to turn our wedding into a spectacle for her elite social circle, then perhaps it was time to remind her of the true power of community, the unbreakable bonds forged through shared experiences and unwavering support. That evening, as I closed up the bakery, I made a series of discreet phone calls, reaching out to those I knew I could trust implicitly. One by one, they agreed to meet me in secret, their voices brimming with concern and a shared determination to stand by my side. The following night, I found myself in the cozy living room of Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow who had been a fixture at the bakery for as long as I could remember. Around me sat a small but formidable group, fellow customers, neighbors, and friends who had become like family over the years. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice trembling slightly with a mixture of nerves and resolve. As you know, Evelyn has been difficult, to say the least, when it comes to the wedding plans. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and I could see the shared frustration etched on their faces. They had all borne witness to Evelyn's disdain, her dismissive attitude toward the very community that had nurtured and supported me throughout my life. "She wants to turn our wedding into a gaudy display of wealth and status," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "But I won't let her diminish the love and support that you've all shown me over the years." Mrs. Thompson reached out and patted my hand, her eyes shining with determination. "We're with you, dear," she assured me. "That woman doesn't know the first thing about true family and community." One by one, they pledged their support, offering ideas and strategies to counter Evelyn's elitist machinations. From securing a prime location for the ceremony to rallying the local businesses to provide their services, a plan began to take shape. A plan to remind Evelyn that true strength lies not in wealth or social standing, but in the unbreakable bonds of community. As the meeting drew to a close, and I looked around at the faces of those who had become my chosen family, I felt a newfound sense of resolve. Evelyn might wield her wealth and influence like a weapon, but she had underestimated the power of genuine love and loyalty. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was determined to emerge victorious, not just for myself, but for the enduring spirit of community that had sustained me through every challenge life had thrown my way. The sound of Evelyn's shrill voice cut through the air like a knife, shattering the tentative peace that had settled over our weekly family dinner. "Honestly, Linda, must you insist on serving such pedestrian fare? One would think you'd have learned a thing or two about proper hosting by now." I felt the familiar sting of her words, the disdain dripping from every syllable as she eyed the simple spread of homemade dishes before her. Dad's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table, but before he could respond, Evelyn continued her tirade. "And this bakery," she sneered, her gaze sweeping over the quaint decor that had once filled me with such pride. "Surely you don't expect my son to be associated with such a common establishment." The air seemed to crackle with tension, and I could feel Mark's discomfort radiating from beside me. He opened his mouth as if to defend me, but the words never came, a silent testament to the hold his mother still had over him. "That's enough, Evelyn," Dad's voice boomed, startling us all with its sudden ferocity. "This bakery has been a cornerstone of our community for generations, and I'll not have you disrespect it, or my daughter, under my own roof." Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in surprise, her lips pursing into a thin line of disapproval. "Jack, darling, I'm merely trying to help Linda understand the expectations that come with being part of our family. Surely you can see how her humble beginnings might be a liability." The words hung in the air like a noxious cloud, and I could feel the anger and hurt radiating from Dad's every pore. This was more than just a petty insult. It was a direct attack on the very values and traditions that had sustained our family for generations. A liability? Dad's voice trembled with barely contained fury. "The only liability here is your complete lack of respect and decency. Linda is a kind, hard-working woman who embodies the true spirit of family and community, something you clearly know nothing about." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the tabletop in a display of barely restrained irritation. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner? I am merely trying to guide Linda toward a more refined way of life." "Refined?" Dad scoffed, his laughter tinged with bitterness. "You call belittling and demeaning others refined? Your idea of refinement is nothing more than a hollow facade, a desperate attempt to cling to a false sense of superiority." The words seemed to hang in the air, a palpable silence descending over the room as Evelyn's face flushed with indignation. For a moment I thought she might storm out, her pride too wounded to endure such a scathing rebuke. But then her expression hardened and she turned her icy gaze towards me. "Linda, darling, surely you don't agree with this outburst." Her voice was sickly sweet, laced with a subtle threat. "You know how important it is to maintain a certain level of decorum, especially with our upcoming nuptials." I felt the weight of her expectation pressing down on me, the unspoken demand that I choose between my father and the woman who would soon be my mother-in-law. But as I looked into Dad's eyes, shining with a fierce determination to protect me, I knew there was no choice to be made. "Evelyn," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging within me. "This bakery, this community, is a part of who I am, and if you can't respect that, then perhaps it's time you reevaluated your priorities." The words seemed to hang in the air, a silent challenge to the woman who had made it her mission to undermine and belittle everything I held dear. And in that moment, as Evelyn's face contorted with barely contained rage, I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. A silent vow to reclaim my dignity and protect the legacy that had sustained my family for generations. As the evening drew to a close and Evelyn swept out in a flurry of indignation, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The seeds of revenge had taken root. A quiet determination to turn the tables on the woman who had tried so desperately to break me. And with the unwavering support of my father and my community, I knew that victory was within reach. The morning of our wedding dawned with a palpable tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. As I slipped into my simple yet elegant gown, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation mingling with the excitement. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, a celebration of love and commitment, but Evelyn's looming presence cast a dark shadow over the proceedings. As I stepped out of the bridal suite, I was greeted by a flurry of activity. Evelyn's elite friends milling about, their designer dresses and expensive jewelry a stark contrast to the warm, familiar faces of my own community. It was as if two worlds had collided, and I found myself caught in the middle, torn between the opulence Evelyn craved and the genuine love and support that had sustained me throughout my life. "Linda, darling, you look absolutely radiant," Evelyn gushed, sweeping over to me with a forced smile plastered on her perfectly made-up face. "Although perhaps we could have done something a bit more elaborate with your hair." I fought back the urge to roll my eyes, reminding myself that today was about more than just appeasing Evelyn's whims. This was my day, our day, and I would not let her dampen the joy and significance of the occasion. As the ceremony began, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, bolstered by the presence of my father and the familiar faces of our loyal customers and friends. These were the people who truly mattered, the ones who had been there for me through thick and thin, long before Evelyn's toxic influence had entered our lives. And then, as if sensing my newfound resolve, Dad took the stage, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and determination. "Friends, family, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two remarkable individuals," he began, his voice ringing out with a clarity and strength that belied his years. "But more than that, we are here to honor the enduring spirit of community, the bonds that transcend mere bloodlines and social status, forged through shared experiences, unwavering support, and a deep appreciation for the simple joys in life." I could see Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrows knit together in confusion, her lips pursing ever so slightly as Dad's words washed over her like a gentle rebuke. "Linda and Mark have chosen to embark on this journey together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in a legacy that stretches back generations," Dad continued, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. "A legacy built on the values of hard work, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to those who truly matter, the people who have stood by their side through good times and bad." As Dad's speech reached its crescendo, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude swell within me. This was more than just a wedding ceremony. It was a defiant declaration of the strength and resilience that had sustained my family and our community for generations, a powerful rebuke to Evelyn's shallow obsession with status and wealth. And as I turned to face Mark, his eyes shining with a newfound understanding and respect, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, bolstered by the love and support of those who truly mattered, and the unbreakable spirit of community that had brought us to this moment. The reception was in full swing, the air thick with the mingled scents of expensive perfumes and the familiar aroma of freshly baked treats from the Harris Bakery. As I made my way through the crowd, exchanging warm embraces and heartfelt congratulations, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and vindication wash over me. Despite Evelyn's best efforts to turn our wedding into a gaudy display of wealth and status, the genuine love and support of my community had shone through, overshadowing her hollow network of social climbers. Their presence was a tangible reminder of the true strength that lay in the bonds of family and community, bonds that transcended mere bloodlines and social standing. As I caught sight of Evelyn, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer dress, a stark contrast to the warmth and simplicity that surrounded her, I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation. She had been uncharacteristically subdued during the ceremony, no doubt stung by Dad's powerful speech and the outpouring of affection from our guests. But I knew better than to expect her to retreat quietly into the night. Evelyn was a woman accustomed to getting her way, and she would not relinquish her grip on power and control without a fight. Sure enough, As I approached the head table, her eyes narrowed, and she rose to her feet, a hush falling over the room as she cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment." I felt Mark tense beside me, his hand tightening around mine as we braced ourselves for the onslaught. "As many of you know, I have had my reservations about this union," Evelyn began, her voice dripping with disdain. "Not because I harbor any ill will toward Linda, of course, but because I fear she may not be suited for the lifestyle that comes with being part of our family." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and I could feel the eyes of my community members burning into Evelyn, their silent support bolstering my resolve. "You see, the Bryant name carries with it a certain level of prestige, a certain expectation," Evelyn continued, her gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. "And while I'm sure Linda's humble upbringing has instilled in her a certain set of values, one can't help but wonder if she truly understands the responsibilities that come with our station." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I could feel the anger and hurt radiating from Dad's every pore. But before he could respond, before the fury that had been simmering within me could boil over, a voice rang out from the crowd, clear, strong, and unwavering. "With all due respect, Mrs. Bryant," Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow who had been a fixture at the bakery for as long as I could remember, stepped forward, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "It seems to me that you're the one who doesn't understand the true meaning of family and community." A hush fell over the room as Evelyn's perfectly sculpted eyebrows knit together in confusion, her lips pursing ever so slightly. "Linda may not have been born into your world of wealth and privilege," Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice carrying a weight and authority that belied her years. "But she has something far more valuable, a deep appreciation for the bonds that truly matter, the ones forged through shared experiences, unwavering support, and a genuine love for the simple joys in life." One by one, the other members of our community stepped forward, their voices rising in a chorus of support, each sharing their own stories and memories of the warmth and kindness that Linda had brought into their lives. As the testimonials washed over me, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude swell within my chest. These were the people who had stood by me through thick and thin, who had seen me not just as a customer or a neighbor, but as a cherished member of their extended family. And as I turned to face Mark, his eyes shining with a newfound understanding and respect, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, bolstered by the love and support of those who truly mattered and the unbreakable spirit of community that had brought us to this moment. "Mother," Mark's voice rang out, clear and resolute, cutting through the din of the crowd. "I love you, and I will always be grateful for the opportunities you've provided me. But Linda is my wife, my partner, and my future. And if you cannot accept and respect that, then I'm afraid our paths must diverge." A collective gasp rippled through the room as Mark's words sank in, and I could see the color drain from Evelyn's face, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. "From this day forward, I will be taking Linda's surname," Mark declared, his hand tightening around mine in a silent vow of solidarity. "And I will embrace the values and traditions that have sustained her family for generations, values that you, regrettably, seem to have lost sight of." In that moment, as Evelyn stood frozen in stunned silence, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. The shackles of her toxic influence had been broken, and I was free to embrace the life I had always dreamed of. A life filled with love, laughter, and the unwavering support of a community that had become more than just neighbors, but a cherished extension of my family. The months following our wedding passed in a whirlwind of change and adjustment, but through it all, a sense of peace and contentment settled over our lives. With Evelyn's toxic influence finally banished, Mark and I were free to embrace the values and traditions that had sustained my family for generations. Gone were the days of walking on eggshells, constantly second-guessing ourselves to appease Evelyn's elitist whims. Instead, we found ourselves welcomed with open arms into the warm embrace of my community, their unwavering support and genuine affection a balm for the wounds inflicted by years of emotional turmoil. As we settled into our new life together, Mark threw himself wholeheartedly into the daily operations of the Harris Bakery, his natural affinity for numbers and business acumen proving invaluable as we explored ways to expand our reach and share our beloved treats with a wider audience. "You know, Linda," he mused one evening as we pored over the latest sales figures, a contented smile playing on his lips, "I never truly appreciated the magic of this place until now." I couldn't help but chuckle, remembering the disdain that had once clouded his perception, a byproduct of Evelyn's relentless pursuit of status and wealth. "Well, I'm just glad you finally saw the light." Mark's gaze softened, and he reached across the table to take my hand in his. "It's more than that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This bakery, this community, it's a living, breathing embodiment of everything that truly matters in life. Love, loyalty, and the simple joys that money can't buy." As the weeks turned into months, the news of Evelyn's public humiliation and Mark's defiant stance spread like wildfire through her elite social circles. One by one, her so-called friends and associates began to distance themselves, their shallow allegiances crumbling in the face of her tarnished reputation. Meanwhile, our little bakery thrived, buoyed by the unwavering support of our community and the influx of curious newcomers drawn in by the tantalizing aromas and the promise of a warm, welcoming atmosphere. Dad, ever the visionary, saw an opportunity to expand our reach even further, and with Mark's business savvy and my deep-rooted knowledge of the bakery's operations, we embarked on an ambitious plan to open a second location in the heart of the city. The grand opening was a true celebration of our journey, a testament to the resilience and determination that had carried us through the darkest of times. As the ribbon was cut and the doors swung open, a sea of familiar faces greeted us, their smiles and well wishes a poignant reminder of the unbreakable bonds that had sustained us. In the years that followed, our little bakery empire continued to grow, each new location a beacon of hope and community in a world that often felt cold and impersonal. And through it all, Mark and I remained steadfast in our commitment to the values that had brought us together: hard work, loyalty, and an unwavering appreciation for the simple pleasures in life. As I watched Dad play with our children in the warm, golden light of the bakery's kitchen, their laughter mingling with the familiar scents of freshly baked bread and sugary confections, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. This was the life I had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, laughter, and the unwavering support of a community that had become more than just neighbors, but a cherished extension of our family. And in those quiet moments as the world outside faded into the background, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, bolstered by the strength and resilience that had carried us through the darkest of times and the enduring spirit of community that had become the very foundation of our lives. The searing pain hit me like a bolt of lightning, radiating from my core through every nerve ending in my body. I cried out, gripping the bed rails until my knuckles turned white. The contractions were coming faster now, intense waves slamming into me. "You're doing great. Just keep breathing," the nurse encouraged. I tried to focus on her calming voice, using it as an anchor against the agony. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sharp cries of a newborn pierce the air. "It's a girl," the doctor proclaimed. Relief and joy flooded through me as they placed my precious baby girl into my arms. Her tiny fingers grasped at mine as I held her close. In that moment, all the pain dissolved away. I looked up to see Nolan, my husband of 5 years, staring down at us. But instead of the loving gaze I expected, his face was etched with tension. His eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "She's perfect," I whispered, tears of happiness trailing down my cheeks. Nolan gave a curt nod. "Get some rest. I need to make a call," he said abruptly before slipping out of the room. A gnawing feeling began to take hold in my gut. Something wasn't right. Ever since I had gotten pregnant, Nolan had grown increasingly distant and cold. It was a stark contrast to the man I fell in love with, who had once been my biggest supporter. I tried to push away the dark thoughts creeping in. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Nolan returned half an hour later, his jaw clenched. I searched his face, looking for any trace of joy or excitement, but found none. "Who was on the phone?" I asked. He avoided my gaze. "No one. Look, we need to talk." I noticed he was still wearing his wedding ring, the plain gold band I had placed on his finger 5 years ago, the one he promised he would never take off. But now it seemed like a lie. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Nolan stood rigidly at the foot of the bed, his eyes cold. "This isn't working. I've tried, but I can't do this anymore." His words dropped like stones in the pit of my stomach. "Do what exactly?" "This." He made a gesture with his hand. "I'm in love with someone else." The room started spinning. This had to be a nightmare. "What are you saying?" I whispered. He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Her name is Cassidy. We've been seeing each other for months. I'm going to be with her." Suddenly, the past year replayed in my mind on fast forward. Nolan's unexplained absences, his emotional distance, it all clicked into place. Rage boiled up inside me. "You cheated on me while I was pregnant with your child." He stood there, stone-faced. "Cassidy was there for me in ways you weren't." The audacity of his words stole the breath from my lungs. I glared at him with every ounce of loathing I could muster. "Get out," I seethed. "Get out before I call security to drag you out of here." For a moment, Nolan just stared at me. Then, without another word, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him with dreadful finality. I looked down at my innocent baby, still cradled protectively in my arms. Nolan had turned his back on us, but I would never abandon my child. A steely resolve rose up within me, cutting through the shock and anguish. If Nolan wanted a war, he would get one. I would make him regret the day he ever betrayed us. The next few days passed in a haze of feedings, diaper changes, and sporadic bursts of sleep. My thoughts constantly drifted back to Nolan's cruel revelation in the hospital room. I replayed the scene over and over, analyzing every detail. The cold detachment in his eyes, the matter-of-fact tone as he declared his love for another woman. My best friend Juliana came to visit often, helping around the house and providing a sympathetic ear. I found myself obsessively recounting Nolan's betrayal to her, as if speaking the words aloud might miraculously change them. "That bastard! I never trusted him," Juliana declared, her eyes flashing. "Don't waste another second worrying about that snake." I sighed, adjusting the swaddled newborn in my arms. "I just don't understand how he could do this. We were so happy once." Juliana shook her head. "People show their true colors eventually. He never deserved you." I thought back to the early days with Nolan, how he used to surprise me with flowers, how we would stay up all night talking. When had it all gone wrong? "I ignored so many red flags," I said quietly. "The late nights at the office, the locked phone screen. I feel so stupid." "This is not your fault." Juliana squeezed my shoulder. "Nolan chose to betray his vows. Don't let him make you feel guilty, too." Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on healing both physically and emotionally. But lingering doubts continued to plague me. I needed proof of Nolan's affair, some tangible confirmation that this Cassidy person truly existed. One evening, Juliana arrived on my doorstep, eyes blazing with fury. That asshole thought he could keep his little secret contained at the office. Well, it's all out in the open now. She revealed that she had discreetly investigated at the company where Nolan and I both worked. Rumors of his affair with a younger colleague named Cassidy had spread like wildfire. "It's definitely the same woman he mentioned," I said bitterly. "He wasn't even trying to hide it from people at work." Juliana nodded. "I'm so sorry, Alara, but at least now you know the truth. He doesn't deserve your tears." Hot anger pulsed through me as reality sank in. Nolan had paraded his mistress around, utterly unconcerned about my pain or public humiliation. I pictured his smug face and felt pure loathing wash over me. He had slipped the knife in my back when I was at my most vulnerable. Well, it was time I returned the favor. A week later, I was finally discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to rest and recover. As I settled into my bedroom, a sense of peace washed over me. For the first time since that wretched day, Nolan destroyed our lives. I had just finished nursing the baby when the doorbell rang. Still sore and fatigued, I slowly made my way downstairs. I froze when I opened the front door. Nolan stood on the porch next to a slender blonde woman I could only assume was Cassidy. Before I could react, they brushed past me into the foyer. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, blocking their path. Nolan glanced around impatiently. "I'm here for my things. Cassidy will help me pack up." I gaped at them. Did they think they could just barge in and take over? Cassidy gave me a disparaging look. We're here to take the baby too. She deserves a proper home. Rage surged within me. You must be out of your damn minds if you think I'm letting her go anywhere with you, I spat. Nolan stepped forward menacingly. I will be a part of my daughter's life, like it or not. Over my dead body, I snarled. Get out before I call the cops. Just then I heard the front door swing open again behind me. I wouldn't unpack just yet if I were you, came Juliana's voice. I turned to see her waving a manila envelope, eyes flashing. Nolan paled at the sight of her. In fact, I think you'll both be cleaning out your desks at the office instead, she continued. Cassidy let out a scoff. And who the hell are you? Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is that I have enough evidence here of your sordid affair to bury you both. Juliana pulled out printed emails and photographed text conversations documenting their relationship, all time-stamped during my pregnancy. Nolan lunged for the papers, but Juliana yanked them away. Ah, too late. Copies have already been sent to the head office. Hope you don't mind facing a sexual harassment investigation, Cassidy. Cassidy gasped, glanced frantically at Nolan, then fled for the still-open door. After a final venomous glare, Nolan followed close behind. I turned to Juliana, awestruck. How did you get all that? She winked. I have my sources. No one messes with my best friend. Relief swept over me. Once again, Juliana had proven herself a loyal ally. While Nolan and his mistress reaped the bitter harvest of their lies, I would keep forging ahead. Upstairs, my innocent baby slept soundly, unaware of the darkness that had invaded our lives. Gazing at her sweet face, I knew I would move mountains to make sure she never suffered like I had. Nolan had slipped the knife in my back when I was vulnerable. Now it was my turn to take everything from him. His dignity, his career, his reputation. The only thought sweeter than revenge was the chance to start over, far from his shadow. The next morning, I received an urgent call from Juliana, instructing me to get to the office immediately. Still weak and sore, I reluctantly left my newborn with a neighbor and drove downtown. Juliana met me outside the towering glass building that housed our company's headquarters. I hope you're ready for a show, she said with a sly grin. Up in the executive wing, we stepped into a posh waiting area outside the president's office. Cassidy was already there, pacing and biting her nails. When she saw me, her eyes flashed with hatred. At that moment, the office door swung open and Nolan stalked out, face pale. He froze when he saw us, fear creeping into his expression. Mr. Harlan, the company president, emerged behind Nolan and beckoned us all inside. Please, have a seat, Harlan said politely as we filed in. He was known as much for his courtesy as his shrewd intelligence. Cassidy sat ramrod straight, eyes fixed on the floor. Nolan drummed his fingers anxiously on the armrest beside her. Harlan neatly arranged papers on his desk before folding his hands. It seems we have some personnel issues that require immediate attention. He turned to Cassidy first. You are aware that intimate relationships between employees are against company policy? Yes, sir, she answered tersely. And yet clear evidence shows you had an ongoing affair with a married executive, a man whose wife, I might add, you worked closely with during her difficult pregnancy. Cassidy flushed but said nothing. Harlan continued in measured tones. Your actions show a disturbing lack of integrity and professionalism. Effective today, your employment is terminated. Cassidy shot to her feet. You can't do this. My family donated half the artwork in this building. Harlan didn't blink. Your aunt may be a noted philanthropist, but neither she nor your family name will excuse misconduct here. Defeated, Cassidy grabbed her purse and fled the office. Nolan reached out as if to stop her, then seemed to think better of it. Harlan turned his attention next to Nolan. Not only did you violate company rules, you abandoned your family duties. Such poor character does not befit a senior executive. Nolan's face twisted. I've given 15 years to this firm. You can't throw me out over one mistake. It was no mere mistake. You systematically deceived your wife and jeopardized an important project, distracting your team for months. Your presence here is now untenable. Harlan slid an envelope across the desk. Here is the terms of your severance package. I suggest you accept and make a quiet departure. With shaking hands, Nolan took the papers and left. I watched him go with a sense of dark satisfaction. Harlan gave me a kind look. My dear, you were clearly the injured party here. Consider this matter closed on the company's end. I hope you recover fully, both physically and personally." Outside the office, Juliana hugged me tight. I let out a sob I didn't know I'd been holding in, the overwhelming emotions of the past weeks finally crashing over me. It was over. Justice had been swift and sure. Now I could focus on rebuilding a new life with my daughter, a peaceful life, far from the backstabbing duplicity of people like Nolan. When karma came for him, the knife in his back was one he richly deserved. In the weeks following Nolan's termination, I focused on regaining my strength and finding a new normal with my daughter. I took extended medical leave from work, relying on my savings while I figured out next steps. Juliana was a constant support, helping around the house and encouraging me to take it one day at a time. "Forget about Nolan. Everything will work out, you'll see," she said during one late-night chat session. But I couldn't forget. Or forgive. Quiet rage still simmered within me over how Nolan deceived me. I replayed every memory, analyzing all the times he lied straight to my face. He had hurt me deeper than anyone ever had, and he deserved to fully reap what he sowed. Late one night, an idea began to take form. If Nolan thought he could simply walk away unscathed, he was dead wrong. With Juliana's help, I would make sure his betrayal followed him like a dark cloud over every aspect of his life. I decided to start with his beloved career reputation. Nolan had always taken pride in being a rising star at the company, ruthless and ambitious. It was time to crash his image and turn his coworkers against him. Juliana and I drafted an anonymous email detailing Nolan's affair with a direct report during my vulnerable pregnancy. We included key dates and events, along with Cassidy's name. From an internet cafe, we sent the message to everyone in their business circle. Soon after, the heated office gossip mill went into overdrive. Nolan's peers and colleagues were appalled at the sordid details. The portrait of a lying snake emerged, destroying any respect he once commanded. Meanwhile, I spoke with a take-no-prisoners divorce lawyer about destroying Nolan financially. We drew up divorce papers asserting adultery as grounds and seeking full custody with a generous side of child support. Serving Nolan the papers at his new apartment was profoundly satisfying. The look of defeat on his face was priceless. "You'll regret this," he snarled, but we both knew all the power rested firmly in my hands now. Getting my revenge on the home-wrecking Cassidy required a subtler approach. I unearthed her active social media accounts and anonymously sent screenshots to her college friends of her boasting about seducing a married man. The backlash was swift and severe. Calls for her to be fired from her new waitressing job flooded her online profiles. Old friends and roommates publicly denounced her character. She disappeared from social media entirely less than 24 hours later. While Cassidy retreated into obscurity, Nolan would soon endure the full public humiliation of a court battle dragging his name through the mud. I hoped the legal fees and child support bled him dry. As I rocked my baby to sleep each night, the dark thoughts receded and calm took its place. The storm Nolan brought into our lives had cleared. Soon we would be free of him for good. The memories of the loving man I once knew replaced by the far more accurate image of a spineless, cruel traitor. He was finally getting exactly what he deserved. The day of my first divorce hearing arrived gray and bleak, fittingly mirroring my mood. I dressed in sober black and steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. I strode into the courtroom with my head held high, refusing to show an ounce of weakness. Nolan sat at the defendant's table, looking pale and twitchy. His usual well-groomed appearance was notably absent. As we went through initial motions, Nolan tried repeatedly to catch my eye. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, acting as if he weren't even in the room. When the judge questioned Nolan about the affair accusations, he sputtered unconvincingly. It meant nothing, just a stupid mistake. My lawyer presented ironclad evidence of the timeline of his betrayal coinciding with my vulnerable pregnancy. Nolan had no counter-argument. On the custody issues, Nolan became agitated and confrontational. "You can't prove I wouldn't be a fit parent," he burst out. The judge's tone grew stern. "You have not participated in caring for your newborn child. These allegations against your character are troubling." In the end, the judge approved our proposed arrangements for full custody and a substantial monthly child support payment. Nolan had lost completely on all fronts. The burning fury in his eyes spoke volumes. As we left court, Nolan grabbed my arm and forced me to face him. "I won't let you take my daughter away from me," he hissed. I yanked my arm back. "Touch me again and I'll have my lawyer file for a restraining order." Leaving him fuming, I walked away feeling victorious. The law was firmly on my side. Over the next few weeks, Nolan maintained a campaign to salvage his reputation without success. He tried shifting blame, claiming I pushed him away during pregnancy and refused marital affection. But the facts of his prolonged deceit were indisputable. Former colleagues and business contacts continued to ice him out, disgusted by the very public details of his affairs and misconduct. Doors closed swiftly when he came calling for job prospects. Nolan grew increasingly unhinged, ranting on social media about injustice and karma coming for those who wronged him. But his credibility was shot. Few paid him any mind. Meanwhile, I embraced single motherhood with a new optimism. The final divorce decree arrived right before my daughter's first birthday, with all terms in my favor. The new year felt full of promise and possibility. On a whim, I reached out to my former workplace and discovered they had an opening, eager to have me return. The chance to fully rebuild my career after years on the mommy track felt like a hard-won victory. As I regained my financial independence and stability, I marveled at how far I'd come. Just a year ago, my world had come crashing down. Now the future looked bright through eyes unclouded by lies and betrayal. Nolan had gotten the bitter revenge he deserved, and I had reclaimed my life. Over the next year, I fell into a rhythm of balancing work and motherhood. My new role involved less travel, allowing me to better care for my daughter's needs. Having the flexibility to leave early for school pickups and doctor visits made all the difference. Settling into my own place also brought immense relief. The wounds of Nolan's betrayal no longer haunted every corner. This was a home filled with new memories and possibilities. My social life also revived as I reconnected with old friends. Juliana remained a stalwart support, helping wrangle my rambunctious toddler during girls' nights out. Her companionship brought much-needed fun and laughter into my days. Meanwhile, Nolan's circumstances continued to crumble. With his reputation in tatters, he could only find spotty contract work. He burned through his remaining savings trying to keep up appearances and pay owed debts. I heard through the grapevine that he was hitting the bottle pretty hard too, often drunk and belligerent in public. It seemed anyone still willing to associate with him was another cheating lowlife or enabler. On the rare occasions our paths crossed, Nolan's bloodshot eyes and disheveled appearance only emphasized how far he'd fallen. He was a shell of the polished, ruthless corporate climber I'd once known. "We could have had it all," he slurred to me on one awkward chance encounter outside my office building. "It wasn't meant to turn out like this." I sidestepped him with a shrug. Should have thought of that sooner. I had long since stopped caring about anything he had to say. After 2 years of sporadic calls and texts full of bitter recriminations, Nolan's contact gradually faded to nothing. The biggest surprise was realizing I didn't miss him in the slightest. I was finally free, fully healed from wounds that had once cut so deep. My daughter remained oblivious to her father's dysfunctional spiral into obscurity. To her, family meant me, Grandma, and Aunt Juliana. She was thriving in preschool and had playdates most weekends with classmates. I made sure her life was filled with love and joy. As for Cassidy, the homewrecker who helped implode my marriage, karma had left its mark on her too. Crippled by the scandal and social media backlash, she had changed her name and left the state. Wherever she ended up, I hope guilt haunts her over what she helped destroy. Maybe Nolan can give her late-night calls instead. On the eve of my daughter's 4th birthday, I hosted a princess tea party with 10 giggling little girls crowding my living room. As I snapped photos and filled teacups, my heart swelled with love and pride. The painful past felt like a distant lifetime ago. Now my days were rich with playfulness and possibility, chasing around a bright-eyed daughter who was the center of my world. I had traveled through the darkness and come out wiser, stronger, renewed in body and spirit. The future awaited, more radiant than ever. Time marched steadily onward, each new day further distance between my present happiness and the pain of the past. My daughter thrived in elementary school, smart and social. She excelled in reading and loved showing off new dance moves she learned in hip-hop class. Her eyes, so like her father's, now sparkled with joy he had long forfeited the right to witness. At my company, years of consistently superb work paid off with a promotion to a director-level position. I now led a team of bright up-and-comers helping set strategy for our division. It felt surreal to be so highly valued when just a few years prior I'd wondered if my career would fully recover post-divorce. On evenings when my schedule allowed, Juliana and I would meet up for dinner and dissect dating app horror stories. We made an unlikely pair, her flashy and fiery, me understated and dry-humored. But our sisterly bond ran deep. "You really showed that cheating scumbag Nolan what's what," Juliana remarked one night as we lingered over tiramisu. "Not every woman could turn heartbreak into such epic revenge." I smiled wryly. Don't think I didn't imagine slipping arsenic in his wine a few times, but in the end, living well turned out to be the best revenge. One spring morning I spotted a familiar name in the newspaper and my heartbeat quickened reflexively before I could stop it. There was Nolan, looking worn and shabby as he exited a courthouse trying unsuccessfully to dodge photographers. The accompanying article chronicled his guilty plea to drunk driving charges after ramming his car into a tree. His license suspended, career in tatters. The shell of the man I once loved now seemed utterly broken. For the first time in ages, an unexpected pang of sympathy pierced my heart. Whatever latent feelings stirred were quickly extinguished when Nolan's name surfaced again the following week. Arrested on assault charges after a bar fight, his spiral into reckless self-destruction seemed complete. I shook my head, sadly but resolutely. Some people could not be saved from themselves. I had to remain focused on protecting the family we had built, me and our daughter. She was the only part of him worth cherishing. As I helped my little girl practice newly learned multiplication tables that evening, I marveled at how innocence persists even when surrounded by the fallen world. Her childhood was so different from my own, devoid of yelling, mind games, and violence. By some miracle I had overcome my beginnings and broken the cycle. My daughter would grow up trusting in steadfast love, not tiptoeing around landmines. I realized then that I bore no lingering resentments over the pain and deception in my past. Survival and renewal had given me the courage to fully embrace life's complexities. On the other side awaited joy and light, if you just kept moving forward. Nolan's wasted potential was not my concern. His choices led him down a destructive road long before our paths fatefully intertwined. I saw that now with clarity. My task was to raise my daughter with wisdom and compassion, equipping her for whatever lay ahead. As for me, the possibilities of the future beckoned brightly once more. Scars healed and lessons learned, I stepped forward to greet them.
The text message from my brother made my stomach clench. "Can't wait to hear about all your pro bono cases defending criminals, sis. Maybe you'll finally admit law school was wasted on you. I'm Eliana, and my little brother has always had a talent for getting under my skin." The family reunion invitation sat on my granite countertop like a ticking time bomb. Mom's elegant handwriting promising an evening of family bonding and celebration. What it should have said was, passive-aggressive comments and judgment. "You could always cancel," Braden suggested, sliding a fresh coffee across my desk. My colleague and closest friend at the firm had endured years of my family drama stories. And give Adrian the satisfaction? Never. I took a sip of the coffee, savoring its bitter warmth. Besides, Mom would never forgive me. "You could just tell them the truth," he said, leaning against my office doorframe. "Partner at Thompson, Campbell and Associates isn't exactly something to be ashamed of." I shook my head, watching the city lights flicker to life outside my corner office window. "They think I'm still a public defender, because that's what Adrian tells everyone. He's convinced himself that's all I'll ever be. The truth was more complicated. Yes, I'd started as a public defender, and I was damn proud of that work. But 5 years ago, Reese Campbell had seen something in me during a high-profile case. Now, at 35, I was the youngest partner in the firm's history. Not that my family knew any of this. My phone buzzed again. Mom this time. "Honey, please try to keep the peace tomorrow. Your brother's going through a lot right now." "Going through a lot?" I scoffed, showing Braden the message. He's going through a divorce because he couldn't keep his hands off his secretary. That's hardly a tragedy. Speaking of which, Braden's expression turned serious. Have you heard who's handling his wife's case? Before I could answer, my assistant Sarah poked her head in. Ms. Sutton, your mother's here. Mom swept into my office like a perfectly coiffed hurricane, her designer handbag swinging. Eliana, darling, I thought we could have lunch before tomorrow's party. I watched Braden make a strategic retreat, mouthing good luck as he disappeared. Mom, I'm working. You can't just show up. In that tiny public defender's office you're always talking about? She glanced around my obviously luxurious office with confusion. This seems different. I'm covering for a friend. I lied smoothly, the same excuse I'd used for years. What's really going on? She sank into one of my client chairs, her perfectly maintained facade cracking slightly. It's your brother. This divorce. It's going to be ugly. Natasha's hired some high-powered firm. Has she? I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was racing. Thompson, Campbell something or other. They're sharks, apparently. Mom wrung her hands. Adrian's beside himself. He says they'll take everything. I bit back a laugh. If she only knew. Maybe he should have thought about that before sleeping with his 24-year-old secretary, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Eliana, he made a mistake. We all make mistakes. She reached across my desk, patting my hand. Just be gentle with him tomorrow? He's been saying some things about you, I know, but he's hurting. The irony was almost too much to bear. Tomorrow night, at our family reunion, Adrian would undoubtedly mock my career choices again. He'd make snide comments about public defenders and wasted potential, completely unaware that on Monday morning, I'd be sitting across from him in a conference room as opposing counsel's partner. I'll behave if he does, I promised, knowing full well what was coming. Mom stood, smoothing her designer dress. That's all I ask. And darling, maybe wear something a little more professional tomorrow? That navy suit you used to have was nice. I glanced down at my Armani pantsuit and Louboutin heels, easily worth more than what Adrian made in a month. I'll see what I can find. After she left, I pulled up Adrian's divorce file on my computer. There it was in black and white. Natasha Evans versus Adrian Sutton. Primary counsel, Reese Campbell. Partner in charge, Eliana Sutton. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Adrian. Hope you're ready for tomorrow, sis. Brought some big news to share. Time to show everyone what real success looks like. I smiled, thinking about Monday morning's meeting. Oh, Adrian, I whispered to my empty office. You have no idea. 5 years earlier, I sat across from Reese Campbell in a cramped courthouse hallway, my public defender's badge feeling like a target on my chest. You made quite an impression in there, she said, studying me with sharp eyes. Not many lawyers would have caught that inconsistency in the prosecution's evidence. I clutched my worn briefcase tighter. Just doing my job. Your job? Reese laughed. You dismantled the DA's entire case. My client was ready to plead guilty until you proved his innocence. That case had been my breakthrough. A young man wrongly accused of armed robbery, his life hanging by a thread. I'd spent weeks piecing together security footage, proving he'd been across town when the crime occurred. I believe in being thorough, I said, standing to leave. Wait! Reese handed me her business card. Come see me next week. I think you're wasting your talent here. That memory played through my mind as I walked into the family reunion, fashionably late. The country club's banquet room buzzed with conversation, crystal glasses clinking as relatives mingled. There's my favorite failure! Adrian's voice boomed across the room. He was already 3 drinks in, his designer suit slightly rumpled. Still saving the world one criminal at a time? Adrian! I nodded coolly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. You know, he continued, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear, I just closed a 7-figure deal last week. Meanwhile, my big sister's probably still making what, 40 grand a year? Our cousin Maria winced. Adrian, maybe we should... No, let's hear about Eliana's noble sacrifice. he interrupted. Tell us, sis, how many drug dealers did you keep out of jail this month? I took a deliberate sip of champagne. Actually, I've moved on from criminal defense. Oh? His eyebrows shot up. Finally admitted defeat? Before I could respond, Mom appeared between us. Children, please. Adrian, honey, maybe you should slow down on the drinks. I'm celebrating, Mom. He threw an arm around her shoulders. Did you tell her my news? About the merger? I was just about to, Mom said, shooting me a warning look. Adrian's company is merging with... A commotion near the entrance cut her off. Heads turned as Braden burst into the room, tablet in hand. He caught my eye and gestured urgently. Excuse me, I murmured, extracting myself from the family circle. In the hallway, Braden thrust the tablet at me. You need to see this. The headline made my blood run cold. Tech CEO Adrian Sutton's divorce takes ugly turn. Insider trading allegations surface. It just broke, Braden said quietly. Natasha's claiming she has evidence he was trading on non-public information. Through the banquet room doors, I could hear Adrian's loud laughter. The merger's going to make us millions. To success. This changes everything, I said, scanning the article. If these allegations are true... That's not all. Braden swiped to another page. Look who's representing him. Jesus Thompson's name jumped out at me. The same Jesus Thompson who'd tried to poach my biggest client last year, who dismissed me as that public defender playing at corporate law. Perfect, I muttered. Just perfect. My phone vibrated. Reese calling. I answered on the first ring. Tell me you've seen the news, she said without preamble. I'm looking at it now. The insider trading allegations. Change everything, she finished. Listen, Eliana, I know he's your brother, but this case just got a lot bigger. If you want to recuse yourself... No, my voice was firm. I'm staying on. Through the doors, I could hear Adrian holding court. My sister? Oh, she means well, but some people just aren't cut out for the big leagues. Public defenders are important, I guess. But let's be honest. It's where lawyers go when they can't hack it in the real world. Braden touched my arm. You okay? I handed him back the tablet, straightening my shoulders. You know what the funny thing is? 5 years ago, when Reese offered me the job, Adrian told me I'd never survive in corporate law. Said I didn't have the killer instinct. And now? Now he's about to find out just how wrong he was. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Mom. Monday morning's meeting should be interesting. Speaking of which, Braden grinned, what are you going to wear? Something expensive, I said, pushing open the banquet room doors. Very, very expensive. Adrian's voice carried across the room. To my incredible success. And to my sister, bless her heart, still fighting the good fight in her little public defender's office. I raised my glass in his direction, smiling. In less than 48 hours, his world would implode. And I would be there to watch it happen. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I stood in the courthouse, adjusting my crimson Chanel suit, while Reese reviewed our notes one final time. The Morrison case is straightforward, she said. Just don't let opposing counsel rattle you. I smiled, thinking of the much bigger confrontation looming later that day. When do they ever? The courtroom doors opened, and I strode in with the confidence that came from years of victories. 2 hours later, the judge's gavel fell with a satisfying crack. Motion granted in favor of the plaintiff, she announced. Outside the courtroom, Reese squeezed my shoulder. Brilliant work. Now, are you ready for this afternoon? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Adrian's name flashed on the screen, along with a text. Meeting with my hotshot lawyers today. Gonna crush this divorce thing. Wish you had the skills to see a real lawyer in action. Oh, I'll have a front row seat, I muttered. Ms. Sutton? Our assistant appeared, looking nervous. Natasha Evans is here for your 11 o'clock. I found Natasha waiting in my office, perfectly put together in designer clothes that Adrian had probably bought her. She stood when I entered, extending her hand. I had no idea you were... She gestured vaguely. Adrian always said that I was a struggling public defender? I finished, gesturing for her to sit. Yes, he likes that story. I'm sorry, she said quietly. If I'd known you were his sister, I wouldn't have. Stop. I held up a hand. You hired this firm because we're the best. My relationship with Adrian doesn't change that. Reese entered, carrying a thick file. Let's talk about these insider trading allegations. Natasha's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. I found the emails 3 months ago. He was using information from board meetings to tip off investors. The merger. It's not what everyone thinks. Does he know you have this evidence? I asked. No. She pulled out her phone, showing us a series of screenshots. He thinks I'm just after the money. He has no idea. That he could go to prison, Reese finished. My stomach twisted. As much as Adrian deserved to be taken down a peg, this was serious. Have you shown these to anyone else? Just my friend at the SEC, Natasha said. She's the one who told me to get a lawyer. A knock interrupted us. Braden poked his head in. Sorry to interrupt, but Jesus Thompson is here. He's early for the 2 o'clock and making a scene in reception. Of course he is, I muttered. Natasha, would you excuse us? In the reception area, Jesus Thompson stood in an expensive Italian suit, radiating arrogance. Where's Campbell? I'm not dealing with associates today. Actually, I stepped forward, you'll be dealing with me. He looked me up and down dismissively. And you are? Eliana Sutton, managing partner for this case. His eyes narrowed. Sutton? Any relation to the client you're representing? Yes. I smiled coldly. Shall we move this to the conference room? Jesus' face reddened. This is a conflict of interest. I'll have you disbarred. You'll do nothing of the sort, Reese said, appearing beside me. We've already cleared it with the ethics board. Now, shall we discuss the terms of your client's surrender, or would you like to continue making threats? The elevator dinged. Adrian stepped out, his usual smirk freezing when he saw me. Eliana? He looked between me and Jesus. What are you doing here? Working, I said simply. Conference room 3 is this way. Adrian grabbed Jesus' arm. What's going on? Why is my sister here? Because, I turned to face him fully, I'm the partner handling your wife's divorce case. Surprise. The color drained from his face. But, you're a public defender. No, Adrian. I'm the lawyer you always claimed I couldn't be. I gestured to the conference room. Now, let's discuss those insider trading allegations, shall we? What allegations? He stumbled slightly. This is ridiculous. Jesus, do something. Yeah, actually, Reese interjected. Perhaps we should start with the evidence Natasha provided. The emails make for fascinating reading. Adrian's swagger evaporated. Emails? What emails? I opened the conference room door, enjoying the way his hands shook as he reached for his phone. All will be explained. Please, take a seat. Mom's going to hear about this, he threatened weakly. Oh, I'm counting on it. I placed a thick folder on the table. Now, about those stock trades you made last quarter. The door closed behind us with a soft click, and for the first time in our lives, Adrian looked at me with something new in his eyes. Fear. You can't do this to me! Adrian's voice cracked as he paced my office later that evening. I'm your brother! Exactly, my brother who spent years mocking my career choices. I remained seated behind my desk, watching him unravel. How does it feel to know your struggling public defender sister holds your future in her hands? Mom called me 6 times during that meeting, he said, running his hands through his hair. What am I supposed to tell her? The truth might be refreshing. The door opened, and Braden entered with 2 cups of coffee, stopping short when he saw Adrian. Sorry, I didn't realize. No, stay, I said, accepting the coffee. Adrian was just leaving. This isn't over, Adrian snapped, storming out. Braden settled into the chair across from me. That went well. He didn't even acknowledge the insider trading evidence, I said, rubbing my temples. Just kept sputtering about betrayal and family loyalty. Speaking of family, Braden nodded toward my phone, which was lighting up with another call from Mom. I answered on speaker. Hi, Mom. Eliana Marie Sutton. Her voice filled the office. How could you ambush your brother like this? He's devastated. Devastated that he got caught, I corrected. Did he tell you about the illegal stock trades? That's just business, she faltered. You don't understand how these things work. Actually, Mom, I understand perfectly. It's literally my job to understand. A job you never told us about? She paused, and I could picture her pacing her kitchen. All these years, letting us think. Why didn't you tell us? Would it have mattered? Adrian made sure everyone saw me as a failure. You never questioned his version of events. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is watching my brother commit securities fraud while mocking my career choices. I caught Braden's supportive nod. The evidence is solid, Mom. He's in serious trouble. Then help him. You're his sister. I'm also an officer of the court. What he did was illegal. The line went quiet for a moment. Your father would be so disappointed in you. The words hit like a physical blow. Braden reached across the desk, but I waved him off. Dad taught us about integrity, I said quietly. About doing what's right, even when it's hard. I wonder what he'd think about Adrian's choices. She hung up without responding. You okay? Braden asked. Before I could answer, my assistant Sarah buzzed in. Ms. Sutton, Natasha Evans is here again. She says it's urgent. Natasha burst in before I could respond, clutching her phone. He's threatening to expose my past. Says if I don't drop the case, he'll tell everyone about my DUI from college. Let me see, I said, taking her phone. Adrian's text messages were a desperate mix of threats and pleading. Drop the case or everyone learns about your mistake. Think about your reputation. I'll destroy you. Classic Adrian, I muttered, always attacking when he's cornered. Can he do this? Natasha's hands trembled. No, I said firmly. This is witness intimidation. We can add it to the pile. My phone buzzed again. Jesus Thompson calling. I put it on speaker. Your brother's willing to deal, he said without preamble. Full financial settlement. Natasha gets what she wants. We just need the insider trading evidence destroyed. That's not happening, I replied. The SEC's already involved. Think about your family, Eliana. Once this goes public, are you actually suggesting I commit a felony to help cover up another felony? I interrupted. Careful, Jesus. That could get us both disbarred. He hung up with a curse. Braden leaned forward. What's your play here? I looked at Natasha, then back at the mounting evidence on my desk. We push forward. Adrian needs to learn actions have consequences. He'll never forgive you, Natasha said softly. Maybe, but I'll never forgive myself if I let him continue thinking he's above the law. My phone lit up with another text from Adrian. Final chance, sis. Back off or this gets ugly. You're not the only one with secrets. I showed it to Braden, who whistled low. He's desperate. Good, I said, reaching for my briefcase. That means we're winning. Where are you going? Natasha asked. To see my mother, I stood, straightening my jacket. It's time she learned who her children really are. As I headed for the elevator, Braden called after me. What if Adrian's right? What if this destroys your family? I turned back, thinking of all the years of mockery, the dismissive comments, the constant belittling of my choices. Some things, I said quietly, need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt. The elevator doors closed, and I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. Adrian had always accused me of lacking killer instinct. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. The pre-settlement conference room felt like a pressure cooker. Adrian sat across the table, flanked by Jesus, and another attorney I didn't recognize. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a slightly rumpled collar. Before we begin, Jesus announced, my client has prepared a statement. Save it, Reese cut in. We're here to discuss numbers and criminal liability. Adrian's head snapped up. Criminal liability? This is a divorce settlement. It was, I said, sliding a folder across the table, until we found these. The new attorney, a nervous-looking man named Paul, opened the folder and blanched. Mr. Thompson, a word? They huddled in whispered conversation, while Adrian stared at me, his face a mix of anger and fear. What did you give them? Everything, Natasha answered from beside me. The emails, the phone records, the offshore accounts. You vindictive bit. Choose your next words carefully, I interrupted. They're being recorded. Jesus returned to the table, his confidence visibly shaken. We need to discuss parameters. Parameters? Reese laughed. Your client committed securities fraud. The SEC has been notified. The only parameters we're discussing are how much prison time he's facing. Prison? Adrian's voice cracked. Eliana, you can't be serious. We're family. Funny how you only remember that when you need something. The door opened and my assistant entered with a note. I read it and felt my stomach drop. Mom's in the lobby, I announced. She's demanding to be let in. Adrian's face lit up with hope. Yes, let her in. She'll talk sense into you. I nodded to my assistant, and moments later, Mom swept in wearing her best fixing things outfit. This has gone far enough, she declared. Eliana, you're dropping this case immediately. Actually, Reese interjected, she's not. And who are you two? I'm the founding partner of this firm, Reese stood. And your daughter is one of our most valuable partners. She's not going anywhere. Mom's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. Partner. Surprise, I said dryly. Turns out the struggling public defender did okay for herself. But Mom sank into an empty chair. All this time, I confirmed, I let Adrian spin his little narrative because it was easier than fighting it. But now, I turned to my brother. Now you've crossed a line that family can't fix. The SEC will be here in 20 minutes, Reese added. Last chance for a deal. Jesus leaned over to whisper in Adrian's ear. My brother's face went through a rapid series of emotions before settling on defeat. What are your terms? He asked quietly. Full financial disclosure, I began. Natasha gets 70% of all assets. You admit to the insider trading, cooperate with the SEC investigation, and take whatever plea deal they offer. That's insane, Mom protested. Adrian, don't you dare! Mom! Adrian's voice was hollow. Stop! She has everything. The emails, the trades, the shell companies. She has it all. But she's your sister. She can't testify against you. That's spousal privilege, Mom, I corrected. Siblings can absolutely testify against each other, and I will. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Adrian reached for the settlement papers with a shaking hand. You've won, he said, not meeting my eyes. You've finally proven you're better than me. Happy? This was never about being better than you, I replied. It was about being better than what you thought I was. He signed the papers without another word. Mom started crying quietly. The SEC agents will want to speak with you next, Reese informed him. I suggest you cooperate fully. It might mean the difference between 5 years and 10. Adrian stood on unsteady legs. I need some air before they arrive. Don't even think about running, Jesus warned. It'll only make things worse. As Adrian headed for the door, he paused beside my chair. For what it's worth, he said softly. I was wrong about you. You're not just a killer lawyer, you're ruthless. No, I corrected him. I'm just not afraid of you anymore. He nodded once and left. Mom followed, pausing only to say, I hope this was worth destroying our family. After they were gone, Natasha touched my arm. Thank you for everything. I watched through the conference room windows as Adrian waited by the elevators, shoulders slumped, his whole world crumbling around him. The brother who had tormented me for years now looked small and broken. You okay? Reese asked quietly. Ask me again when this is over, I replied, gathering my papers. The SEC will be here soon. Let's finish this. The elevator dinged, and I watched Adrian step inside, disappearing behind closing doors. It felt like the end of something, but also, maybe, the beginning of something else. Something true. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Tech CEO faces securities fraud charges, splashed across every financial website, accompanied by Adrian's corporate headshot. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. "Your brother's asking to see you," Braden said, appearing in my doorway. "He's in the building's lobby." I found Adrian sitting alone on a leather bench, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His designer suit was replaced by khakis and a wrinkled polo shirt. "They froze my accounts," he said without looking up. "All of them." "That's standard procedure in fraud cases. Jesus dropped me as a client." He laughed bitterly. "Said I'm too toxic now. Mom's not answering my calls. Even my doorman looked at me differently this morning." "What do you want, Adrian?" He finally met my eyes. "Help me fix this." "It's too late for that." "Is it?" He stood, desperation clear in his voice. "You're the best lawyer I know. Yes, I can admit that now. There has to be something. The only thing left is to cooperate fully and hope for leniency." I crossed my arms. "The evidence is overwhelming. Because my wife betrayed me. Because my sister. Because you broke the law." I cut him off, repeatedly and deliberately. "This isn't about betrayal. It's about consequences." The lobby security guard was watching us nervously. Adrian noticed and deflated slightly. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly. "All those years I spent mocking you, you were becoming everything I pretended to be. Successful, respected, powerful. You didn't just mock me, Adrian. You actively tried to diminish me. Every family gathering, every holiday, every chance you got. Because I was jealous." The words exploded out of him, echoing through the lobby. "You were always the smart one, the driven one, Dad's favorite. Dad's been gone for 15 years. And you're still trying to make him proud while I'm—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "This." The elevator dinged, and Reese stepped out, followed by 2 SEC agents I recognized from yesterday's interviews. "Mr. Sutton," one of them called. "We have some follow-up questions." Adrian's shoulders slumped. "I suppose this is karma." "No," I said. "This is justice. There's a difference." "Miss Sutton," the other agent nodded to me. "We'll need to speak with you as well." "Of course!" I turned back to Adrian. "Get a good criminal defense attorney. Not a flashy one, a competent one. I can recommend several." "You're still looking out for me," he said wonderingly. "After everything. You're still my brother. That doesn't mean I'll save you from your own choices." The agents led Adrian toward a conference room, but he paused at the door. "Hey, Eliana, remember when we were kids and I pushed you off your bike? You said I'd never learn to ride it anyway. But you did. The next day, you got right back on. I should have known then that you'd always prove me wrong." The conference room door closed behind him, and Reese appeared at my side. "Your mother's giving interviews," she said softly, "claiming you manipulated the evidence to destroy your brother." "Of course she is." I checked my phone. 5 missed calls from Mom, and a text. "How could you do this to our family? The partners want to release a statement," Reese continued. "Show our support for you." "No." I watched through the glass as Adrian slumped in his chair, answering the agent's questions. "Let the evidence speak for itself." My phone buzzed again. Natasha this time. "Just saw the news. Are you okay?" Before I could respond, the elevator opened and Jesus Thompson strode out, heading straight for me. "You've made a powerful enemy," he growled. "Threatening opposing counsel?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold choice for someone facing potential conspiracy charges." His face reddened. "I had no knowledge of—" "Save it for the ethics board," Reese interrupted. "I believe they're very interested in your involvement." Jesus stormed off, nearly colliding with Braden, who was approaching with coffee. "Your mom's on line 1, he said, handing me a cup. "Again, let it ring." I watched Adrian through the conference room window, remembering all the times he'd torn me down, all the years of subtle and not so subtle jabs. Was it worth it? Braden asked quietly. In the conference room, Adrian buried his face in his hands as the agents presented more evidence. Through the glass, I could see his shoulders shaking. Ask me in 10 years, I replied, turning away from the window. Right now, I have work to do. My phone buzzed one final time. A text from Mom. Your father would be ashamed. I typed back 3 words before silencing my phone. No, he wouldn't. Then I straightened my jacket and headed back to my office, leaving my brother to face the consequences of his choices, just as I had faced mine all those years ago. The courtroom fell silent as I approached the podium. Adrian sat at the defendant's table, his new attorney, a competent, no-nonsense woman named Rachel, beside him. 3 months had passed since the scandal broke, and today would determine his fate. Your Honor, I began, I'm here today not as the defendant's sister, but as counsel for Natasha Evans, whose divorce settlement is intrinsically linked to these criminal proceedings. The judge nodded. Proceed, Ms. Sutton. The evidence before you shows a clear pattern of securities fraud spanning 3 years. I gestured to the exhibits displayed on the courtroom screens. Mr. Sutton didn't just break the law. He built his entire business model around breaking it. Adrian wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom sat in the back row, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. The defense claims these were isolated incidents, I continued, mistakes made under pressure. The evidence tells a different story. Rachel stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is editorializing. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Sutton. I pulled up the email chain that had started everything. This exchange from March clearly shows premeditation. Quote, the board doesn't know yet. Buy now before the announcement. Delete this email. Adrian flinched. In the gallery, I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath. The prosecution has already established criminal liability, I said. I'm here to ensure that the civil penalties reflect the scope of the damage. My client's entire marriage was built on fraudulent gains. Your Honor, Rachel interrupted, Ms. Sutton's personal relationship with the defendant creates an obvious conflict, which was reviewed and approved by the Ethics Board, I countered. My relationship with the defendant gives me unique insight into the pattern of deception. The judge leaned forward. Are you prepared to testify to that effect, Ms. Sutton? I am. I turned to face Adrian directly. For years, I watched my brother manipulate facts to serve his narrative. He convinced our entire family I was a failure while he committed federal crimes. The pattern is clear. Objection! Rachel stood again. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. The judge frowned. Stay on point, Ms. Sutton. I nodded, pulling up the financial records. The defendant's actions resulted in over $12 million in fraudulent gains. The proposed settlement of 70% to Ms. Evans is more than fair. It represents only the legitimate portions of their joint assets. Adrian whispered something to Rachel, who shook her head sharply. Furthermore, I continued, we ask the court to consider these civil penalties in conjunction with the criminal charges. Mr. Sutton's cooperation, while late, has been helpful in identifying other participants in the scheme. Jesus Thompson, sitting in the back near Mom, shifted uncomfortably. The SEC's investigation is ongoing, I concluded, but the damage to innocent investors is clear. We ask the court to approve the settlement as structured. The judge reviewed her notes. Ms. Rachel, your response? Adrian's attorney rose. Your Honor, while we don't contest the basic facts, we believe Ms. Sutton's personal vendetta. Objection, Reese called from our table. Sustained, the judge said. Counsel, stick to the settlement terms. Rachel adjusted her approach. We request a more equitable distribution, considering my client's cooperation. His cooperation came only after he was caught, I interrupted, and only after attempting to intimidate witnesses. The judge held up her hand. I've heard enough. Based on the evidence presented, I'm approving the settlement as structured. Mr. Sutton, please rise. Adrian stood on shaky legs. The civil penalties in this case will be addressed separately from your criminal sentencing next week, she continued. But let me be clear. Your attempts to blame family dynamics for your criminal behavior are not persuasive. Your Honor, Rachel started. No. The judge's voice was firm. The evidence is overwhelming. The settlement stands. She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. As people began filing out, Adrian turned to me. Happy now? No, I replied honestly. But it's done. Mom approached, her face tight with anger. I hope you're satisfied, destroying your brother's life for some petty revenge. Mom! Adrian's voice was tired. Stop! She didn't destroy anything. I did this to myself. The admission seemed to shock her into silence. Reese appeared at my elbow. SEC wants to talk to us about Thompson's involvement. I nodded, gathering my files. As I turned to leave, Adrian called after me. Hey, sis! His voice cracked slightly. Remember when we were kids and you wanted to be a superhero? What about it? You said you wanted to fight for justice. He smiled sadly. Guess you got your wish. I watched as the bailiff led him away, Mom trailing behind them, still clutching her handbag. The courtroom emptied until only Reese and I remained. You okay? She asked. Ask me after his criminal sentencing next week. I straightened my jacket. Right now, we have more work to do. We walked out together, leaving behind the echoes of family bonds, broken and reformed in the pursuit of justice. Sometimes, I realized, being a hero meant making the hardest choices, even when they hurt the ones we love. The prison visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Adrian sat across from me in his beige jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. 3 years into his 5-year sentence, this was only our second visit. You cut your hair, he said by way of greeting. You grew a beard. I gestured to his face. It suits you. Not much choice in here. He fidgeted with his sleeve. Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Your letter was convincing. He nodded, glancing around the room where other inmates visited with family. Mom finally stopped sending money to my commissary account. I know. She called me about it. Really? His eyebrows shot up. You two are talking again? We had lunch last week. I smiled slightly. She admitted she might have been wrong about a few things. Adrian leaned forward, lowering his voice. Is it true what I heard about Jesus Thompson? 15 years? 17. Turns out he was running schemes with half a dozen other clients. Your cooperation helped bring that to light. Karma's a bitch, he muttered, then caught himself. Sorry, I'm trying to be better about everything. The prison therapist you mentioned in your letter, she's helping? Dr. Chen. He nodded. She's the one who suggested I reach out to you, said I needed to stop blaming others for my choices. A guard walked past, and we fell silent until he passed. I saw your name in the paper, Adrian said. That big civil rights case you won? You're following my cases? Every one I can find. He smiled weakly. Turns out the prison library gets all the major papers. I've become quite the legal scholar. Better late than never. Yeah. He rubbed his face. Listen, I've been practicing what to say to you for months. Can I just... I nodded. I was jealous, he said simply. Not just of your success, but of your integrity. You knew who you were, what you stood for. I was so busy trying to look successful that I forgot to actually be good at anything real. Adrian, let me finish. He held up a hand. What I did was wrong. Not just the fraud, but how I treated you. All those years of putting you down, making you feel small. I did it because I felt small, and I'm sorry. The words hung between us, heavy with decades of history. Natasha got remarried, I said finally. I know, to that kindergarten teacher. He smiled genuinely. Good for her. She deserves to be happy. A bell rang, signaling the end of visiting hours. Before you go, Adrian said quickly, I have something for you. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Made it in the woodshop here. It was a carefully drawn blueprint for a bicycle, the same model I'd learned to ride on after he pushed me off. Thought maybe, he hesitated, maybe when I get out, I could build one. For your kid. I stared at him. How did you know I was… Mom mentioned you've been sick in the mornings. He shrugged. I can do math. I haven't told anyone at work yet. Secret's safe with me. He stood as the guard approached. For what it's worth, you're going to be an amazing mother. You always were better at taking care of people than I was. I tucked the blueprint into my bag. You know, they have a law library here. Yeah? Could always use some pro bono help with research, if you're interested. His face lit up. Really? You said you're following my cases. Might as well make yourself useful. The guard cleared his throat. Time's up. Adrian nodded. Thank you for coming, for listening, for everything. That's what big sisters do. No, he said seriously. That's what good people do. I'm just sorry it took me so long to see that. As I gathered my things, he called after me. Hey, Eliana. Yeah? When the baby comes, will you tell them about me? I turned back. I'll tell them their uncle is learning to be brave enough to face the truth. That sometimes the hardest victories are the ones we win over ourselves. Still talking like a lawyer, he smiled. Still your sister, I replied. Walking out of the prison, I placed a hand on my stomach, thinking about cycles breaking and new beginnings. My phone buzzed, Braden reminding me about tomorrow's deposition. The world of justice and consequences continued turning, but something had shifted, like a broken bone finally setting right. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Sometimes that's enough of a victory to build a future on. I took one last look at the prison before getting in my car. The blueprint in my bag felt like a promise, not of perfection, but of possibility. Sometimes that's all any of us can ask for. That and the courage to keep pedaling forward, no matter how many times we fall.
Worthless, Aunt Clara muttered under her breath as she strode past me, not even attempting to lower her voice. I glanced up from my sketchbook just in time to see the disdain written across her face before she turned away. I looked down again quickly, gripping my pencil tighter while trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I sat tucked away in the back corner of my aunt and uncle's overcrowded living room, sketching quietly during our family's monthly gathering. All around me, chatter and laughter echoed off the walls as my relatives socialized, doused in a healthy glow of wine. I did my best to make myself small and unnoticed. It wasn't difficult. I'd had 15 years of practice. Did you see Theo's last game, though? My mom's voice rang out loudly from the kitchen. 2 touchdowns. They won by a landslide. A chorus of cheers and congratulations erupted in response. I snuck a glance across the room at my cousin holding court over a captive audience, grinning from ear to ear. His Letterman jacket hung proudly over the back of his chair, trophy glinting under the lights. I looked back at my sketchbook just as Aunt Clara walked by again. She stopped short this time, narrowing her eyes as she spotted my work. Still scribbling away as usual, I see, she noted in a tone that landed somewhere between curiosity and disgust. Don't you have homework to be doing or something? I pressed my lips together, staring intently at my paper. I finished it already. Well, I suppose it's harmless enough, she dismissed with a wave of her ring-laden hand before walking away. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter. Her words echoed in my ears. Worthless, harmless. I knew she thought both about me and my art. Somewhere deep down, I feared the worst part was she could be right. I jumped as a gentle hand grasped my shoulder. I looked up to see Uncle Max's kind eyes peering down at me through his thick glasses. Don't listen to her, Lila, he said softly. I think what you create is lovely. I managed a small smile in return, comforted more by the solidarity of his gaze than the compliment itself. Uncle Max was the only one who ever bothered to look closely at my drawings. He seemed to understand the pangs of being overlooked amid the symphony of other people's noise. As he gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze before walking away, I realized this monthly gathering marked the 3rd in a row he had offered me those same gentle words. Don't listen to her. His reassuring gestures were becoming something of a ritual, I mused. One I appreciated more deeply each time. The lively hum of the party clambered on around me, but I felt cocooned by Uncle Max's kindness. I allowed myself to become reabsorbed by the strokes of my pencil, applying darker depth and definition to the portrait emerging on my page. I didn't hear Aunt Claire approach until her shadow was upon me. "I swear, Lila, it's like you live in your own little world sometimes," she scoffed, craning her neck to catch a glimpse of my work. "What are you making that's got you so tuned out anyway?" Before I could respond, she snatched the sketchbook from my lap, already laughing. "Oh, honey, when are you going to grow up?" she cried loudly, her shrill voice cutting through the din. "You can't pay the bills with silly little doodles like this." Faces turned in our direction as heat flooded my cheeks. I stared hard at the floor, willing myself not to cry as a few stray snickers arose. Aunt Clara carelessly dropped my sketchbook back in my lap and strode away, gravelly laugh still spilling from her lips. "Why put in so much effort for something so worthless?" she called over her shoulder. The words pierced my fragile pride, every letter another knife twist to my heart. I hugged my sketchbook tightly to my chest, barely holding back tears. Maybe she was right after all. "Pass the potatoes, please," Aunt Clara demanded, her shrill voice cutting through the chatter around the dinner table as she leaned back in her seat. I quietly handed her the platter, avoiding eye contact and hoping to avoid provoking another of her cutting remarks. It was Thanksgiving, after all. The one day of the year our family insisted on coming together despite the simmering tensions. My hope of getting through dinner unscathed was short-lived. As usual, the conversation quickly turned to comparing my lackluster achievements to Theo's latest accolades. Theo made varsity quarterback as a sophomore. Uncle Ralph boasted loudly between bites of turkey and stuffing. Youngest one in years. "He's the real deal." A round of hearty congratulations followed as Theo grinned, basking in the glow of adoration and free-flowing wine. "I told you he'd be the star of the family," Aunt Clara joined in gleefully. "Brains and talent, he has it all, not to mention that beautiful girlfriend of his." She let out an exaggerated sigh. "My, they will have the cutest baby someday. Can't you just picture it?" More laughter and smiles of agreement rippled around the long table. I sank lower in my chair and pushed a few peas around my plate, face burning. His life did seem pretty perfect, I admitted resentfully to myself. Quarterback, straight A's, leggy blonde doting on his every word. With a dejected exhale, I let my eyes wander around the room, carefully avoiding the golden boy himself. As an involuntary reflex, my gaze landed on my sketchbook, peeking out from my bag in the corner behind Uncle Max's wingback chair. Just like its owner, tucked away, forgotten, worthless. At that moment, Aunt Clara's grating voice cut through my gloom. "It's such a shame not all young people live up to their potential." My eyes snapped to hers at the other end of the table. Her expression feigned sympathy, but I saw the malice flashing behind it. Poor Lila just drifts through life. I don't know how she'll ever amount to anything meaningful without some sparks flying up in that head of hers. Cold dread crept down my spine at the thinly veiled insult. Before I could open my mouth to respond, I felt a large hand firmly grasp my knee under the table. Uncle Max subtly shook his head, silently warning me not to engage. I bristled in frustration but held my tongue. Max gave my leg a supportive squeeze before removing his hand. "Well, what about David?" Aunt Edna chimed in nervously, attempting to reroute the conversation down safer terrain. "How's that mathematics doctorate coming along?" As the attention shifted, I quietly excused myself from the table. I strode swiftly to the corner and snatched up my sketchbook, fleeing to the dark solitude of the back porch. The cold night air bit at my wet cheeks, but I paid it no mind. I sank down on the porch steps, angrily swiping away tears. How dare she? I fumed, hands clenching and unclenching. Who is she to assume she knows my potential? After several shuddering breaths, my rage began to morph into despair. What if Aunt Clara was right? Maybe I would never amount to anything. I gazed forlornly down at my latest sketch, a portrait of Aunt Edna. The intricate details in her kind, wrinkled face had taken me hours to perfect. But what was the point if no one cared? It was worthless, just like me. A warm weight settled around my slumped shoulders, Uncle Max's wool coat. He eased down next to me with a soft groan, eyeglasses glinting in the moonlight. We sat without a word for several moments, my uneven breath sounding loud in the stillness. Finally, Max broke the heavy silence. "Don't listen to her poison, Lila," he urged gently. "She's just threatened by what she can't understand." He tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "But I understand, and I believe your art means something, just like you do." Tears spilled down my face once more, but this time they were tears of gratitude. I slipped quietly out the back door into the crisp night air, carefully closing it behind me before the sounds of the boisterous family gathering could follow me outside. I shrugged my jacket tighter around my shoulders against the chill. Autumn leaves crunched under my shoes as I made my way across the wide back porch and settled onto the wooden steps. Uncle Max and I had taken to meeting here, outside the stuffy, chaotic warmth of my aunt and uncle's home, where the family parties always took place. Here we could talk freely without judgmental ears listening in. Over the last few months since that painful Thanksgiving dinner, Max had become my ally and confidant. The back door creaked open, and I looked up to see Max's tall frame silhouetted in the golden light. He held up the pleated paper bag, clenched in his wrinkled hand, and waved it with a triumphant grin as he eased himself down beside me. "Got them! Had to fight off Martha for the last package," he chuckled in his warm, gravelly tone. He pulled out 2 large sugar cookies, handing me one. I bit into the sweet icing with delight. "Thanks, Uncle Max, you're the best." He smiled, his kind eyes twinkling behind his glasses in the dim glow of the porch light. "I know they're your favorite. I figured you deserved something sweet after all that bitterness earlier." I sighed, smile fading. "She's just never going to accept me, is she?" Max shook his head. "Oh, don't worry about Clara. She's set in her ways, but she's all talk." He gave my shoulder a reassuring pat. "Now tell me what you've been up to." My mood lifted instantly. I applied to the Ridley Art Academy summer program. It's only a few weeks, but they have these amazing classes, and... Max held up a hand, eyes widening in surprise. "Applied? Have you told your parents about this?" I bit my lip, smile disappearing. "No. Mom agrees with Aunt Clara that art is just silly hobby. They'd never take it seriously or support me." Max frowned, leaning back against the porch railing. He seemed to be turning something over in his mind. "Lila," he finally said, "your art, your dreams, they matter. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." He paused, brow furrowing in thought. "In fact, I'd like to help, if you'll let me." I stared, confused but intrigued. "Help how?" "Well, clearly, Clara controls the family purse strings, but there are other resources." He reached out and took my hand, giving it an encouraging squeeze. "Let me fund your art academy tuition, anonymously, of course," he added with a conspiratorial wink. "It can be our secret." My eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Uncle Max, that's incredibly generous, but I could never ask you to." He held up a hand. "You're not asking, I'm offering. I believe in you, Lila, and I want to invest in that talent of yours before anyone tries to snuff it out." His words brought tears to my eyes. After years of discouragement, someone was finally taking me and my art seriously. I threw my arms around his neck in an impulsive hug. "Thank you," I choked out through my tears. "I promise I won't waste this opportunity." Max chuckled, patting my back gently. "Of course you won't. I expect a full portfolio of new pieces when you get back." He pulled away, holding me by the shoulders and gazing at me intently. "Just promise me that from now on, you'll start listening to your own voice instead of theirs. Deal?" I took a deep breath and wiped the remaining moisture from my eyes, feeling as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from my soul. Deal? Deal. I crept up the creaky attic steps as stealthily as I could, clutching my latest art supply store purchase. Even with Uncle Max generously funding my artistic pursuits in secret for the past few months, I still felt like a fugitive, sneaking around behind my family's back. But the flush of excitement I felt unboxing shiny new artist pastels made the whole cloak and dagger act worthwhile. I had discovered I loved working with color almost as much as Mom disapproved of my artistic dabbling, as she called it. I smiled to myself, lifting the basement trapdoor slowly. Better to ask her forgiveness later than permission now. Just as the door was about to latch silently behind me, a shrill voice bellowed up from below. "Lila Grace, what in heaven's name are you doing up there?" Aunt Clara's harsh tones echoed off the attic walls, causing me to jump. The pastels tumbled out of my hands, clattering down the steps along with my heart. "Nothing, Aunt Clara," I stammered, scrambling to collect my forbidden treasures strewn across the aging floorboards before she ascended. My efforts were in vain, however, as her heavy footsteps soon thudded behind me. I wheeled around to find Clara glaring down at the vibrant sticks gripped in my hands, eyebrows raised. Wordlessly, she extended her palm. Sheepishly, I handed her the receipt, clutched in my other hand. Squinting through her bifocals, she examined it for several moments while I held my breath. $84.76, she finally exclaimed. "You spent nearly $100 on coloring sticks?" "They're oil pastels," I corrected under my breath. Her sharp eyes snapped to mine. "What was that?" I shrank back against the chill wall. "Nothing. I just used some extra babysitting money, that's all." "Seems like quite a lot of babysitting," she said skeptically. "And just what do you plan to do with these anyway?" Before I could respond, the attic door unexpectedly swung open. We both turned to see Uncle Max mount the last step, slightly out of breath. "There you both are. They're asking for you downstairs, Claire." He addressed my aunt lightly, but his eyes remained steadily locked with mine. Clara glanced between us, lips pursed in suspicion, but she merely let out an impatient huff before tossing the receipt to the floor. "We're not done discussing your little shopping addiction, young lady," she snapped as she brushed past Max. Once her footsteps retreated, I let out the breath I had been holding. "Thank you," I exhaled with relief. Max brushed aside my gratitude with a wave of his hand. "Don't worry about her." Yet behind his casual tone, his brows knitted with concern. I sighed, sadness suddenly deflating my mood as I sunk down onto an old cedar chest. "She's right, though. I can't keep sneaking around like this forever." I lifted my gaze to meet my uncle's kind eyes. "Especially using money you work so hard for. It's too much," I confessed softly. Max crossed the room and crouched down in front of me, gently cupping my chin in his aged hand. "Nonsense. That light I see ignite in you when you create is worth every penny. Don't let Clara make you feel otherwise," he urged. His voice took on an icy edge. "And don't you dare give up." My eyes misted over with emotion. I covered his sturdy hand with my own trembling one. "I won't," I promised in a whisper, "as long as you believe in me." Max smiled then, a smile so warm and full of affection that in that moment I felt I could conquer anything. I paced the threadbare living room carpet, absently winding a lock of hair around my finger. The early morning sun streamed in through the crocheted curtains, glinting off the crystal vase on the coffee table. Usually the colorful wildflowers Aunt Edna lovingly arranged lifted my mood, but today I barely noticed them. "What's got you wearing a groove into my rug so early, child?" I spun to find Edna peering at me curiously from the doorway, already impeccably dressed for the day ahead despite the early hour. I smiled weakly, clearing my throat. "Just thinking about the regional young artist competition," I explained, aiming unsuccessfully for a casual tone. "The application deadline is at the end of the week." Edna nodded knowingly as she settled herself onto the overstuffed sofa. "Clara still refuses to support such nonsense." She made air quotes with her manicured fingers, eliciting a small chuckle from me despite the circumstances. My fleeting laughter quickly faded back into a grimace. "She said if I waste my time entering, I'm also wasting her money. Basically, she's threatening to cut me off if I apply." My shoulders slumped dejectedly at the memory of my aunt's cruel ultimatum from the night before. Before the defeat could fully settle across my face, I felt Edna's graceful hand under my chin, gently tilting my eyes back up to meet her earnest gaze. "Lila, has Clara ever created anything of beauty or value in her entire life?" she asked pointedly. I slowly shook my head, confused but captivated by the sudden fire in her tone. "No. Yet for some bizarre reason, she still believes she is entitled to have authority over yours," Edna continued. Her eyes softened then, brow creasing in motherly concern as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Promise me you won't allow her to dictate your worth, sweetheart," she implored. "Don't sacrifice your talent to satisfy that bitter, jealous snake of a woman. She doesn't deserve that power over you." I blinked back the hot tears suddenly burning behind my eyes. Overcome with emotion, I wrapped my arms around her slender shoulders. "Thank you, Aunt Edna," I whispered into her soft gray hair. In response, she squeezed me tightly, patting my back with her smooth hand. As we finally pulled apart, I caught sight of Uncle Max standing quietly in the doorway behind us. Our eyes met, a silent question hanging between us. Well, what now? I took a deep, shaky breath. Hope and fear dueled within me. But seeing the unwavering conviction shining from Max's gaze, I knew I only had one real option. I turned back to Edna with newfound resolve. You're both right. She doesn't control me. I'm submitting my portfolio, with or without her approval. A slow grin spread across my uncle's wrinkled face. Edna let out a delighted laugh, lightly swatting my knee. "Atta girl!" Max pronounced proudly. He gestured to the unseen painting upstairs that he had secretly financed for my application. "Now, let's make sure they see exactly what they'll be missing out on." Buoyed by their belief in me, I marched from the room with fresh purpose fueling every step. I was through hiding myself and my art away. For the first time, I felt brave enough to stand up for my dreams, no matter the cost. I took a deep, centering breath as I pushed open the tall glass gallery doors. The familiar smells of paint, turpentine, and fresh lacquer washed over me, instantly sparking my creativity. I felt at home here among these floors and walls that showcased artistic vision instead of suppressing it. Unlike my own home, I thought ruefully. I wound through the maze of partition walls displaying the regional Young Artists Contest submissions, searching for my collection. My heels clicked crisply on the polished concrete floors, echoing through the cavernous space. Despite having captured first prize in the competition last month, the thrill of that victory had been short-lived. Oh sure, Edna and Max had celebrated exuberantly on my behalf, toasting my talent with a bottle of contraband champagne, but my parents could barely mutter a half-hearted congratulations through tight lips. Mother refused to even glance at the museum passes and tuition voucher the contest awarded me. And Aunt Clara, she had flown into such a jealous rage when she learned of my win that she stormed off in disgust, vowing to never speak to me again. Her reaction still stung, marring what should have been a shining moment of validation. I rounded a corner, and there suddenly were my paintings, a collection of vivid, abstract cityscapes titled Overlooked Beauty. I traced a gentle finger down the gilded plaque bearing my name, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. No matter their reaction, this was still an incredible honor at just 18. These pieces represented my true vision, not anyone else's expectations of what art, or my future, should look like. My smile slipped as footsteps echoed behind me, followed by a grating chuckle that could only belong to one person. I steeled myself as Clara's scowl appeared over my shoulder in the painting's reflective glass. "Well, it's about time you grew up and started painting something worthwhile," she proclaimed with begrudging approval. Her critical eye assessed the building's luminous geometries and brooding alleyways. "At least these I can actually recognize as art, instead of that avant-garde nonsense you usually dirty a canvas with." I clenched my fists behind my back, holding back the acid retort on the tip of my tongue. As I met her baleful gaze in the glass, I realized defending my work was no longer needed. The prize ribbons did that for me now. I simply cleared my throat and gestured to a nearby painting of a crumbling liquor store glowing vibrantly against a stormy sky. "The buildings no one else notices often hold the most beauty inside," I offered mildly. "It's all about perspective." Clara narrowed her eyes, processing the subtle meaning behind my words. Before she could supply a scathing rebuttal, however, Max suddenly materialized beside us. "There you both are. Lila, the gallery director, is looking for you," he interjected smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder. "The mayor wants to discuss commissioning a city mural. Shall we?" He guided me away without another glance at Clara's dumbfounded expression. As we walked, I felt lighter and more self-assured than I had in years. The Aunt Claras of the world would always try to hide my shine out of jealousy. But it was getting far harder to dim my inner light these days, especially with Uncle Max so devoted to stoking my creative fire. A waiter crossed in front of me, obscuring my view of the gallery's entrance for a moment. I tracked him impatiently with my eyes as he wove through the well-dressed crowd, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. When he finally moved aside, I caught sight of Aunt Clara making yet another dramatic entrance. I grimaced to myself behind my own champagne flute. Trust Clara to be fashionably late to an event celebrating someone else's success. She glided into the gallery in a slinky black dress more suited to a cocktail party than an art show, air-kissing the room as all eyes turned to admire her. I noticed more than a few men's gazes linger a bit too long on her overly accentuated curves as she held court. "Quite an eye-catching woman," Max commented discreetly as he appeared beside me, following my irritated gaze. "She knows it too," I muttered before taking another sip. "But let her preen. Tonight is about my art, not her." Max smiled and clinked his glass gently against mine. "I'll toast to that." Any further conversation was interrupted by the gallery director's amplified voice welcoming the crowd. I thanked her politely as she congratulated me on the turnout and praised my evocative urban scenes. As she moved away to confer briefly with the curator, Clara slinked up in her wake. "Well, congratulations, dear," she purred with mock sincerity, air-kissing my cheek. "Who knew your silly little pastime might actually lead somewhere?" Her patronizing smile didn't reach her eyes. I suppose beauty is subjective after all. I resisted the urge to wipe off her cloying lipstick. "How gracious of you to come, Aunt Clara," I replied evenly instead, "since I know how subjective creative pursuits can be for you." Clara's painted smile faded slightly. Before she could supply what was surely a scorching retort, the director returned to the microphone, bringing the chatter to a close. "Again, we are so pleased to showcase this promising young talent's unique perspective," she said, gesturing toward me. "It's clear Lila has a fresh, meaningful artistic vision, one that her Uncle Max should be very proud of cultivating." Murmurs of appreciation echoed from the audience along with a smattering of applause. Clara's head swiveled sharply between me and Max. Under the weight of her glare, understanding visibly dawned across her primped features, followed swiftly by outrage. But before she could cause a scene, I stepped forward, holding up a gracious hand to acknowledge the accolades. "Actually, my Aunt Clara deserves quite a lot of credit for the inspiration behind this collection," I interjected smoothly into the microphone. "In fact, the title, Overlooked Beauty, is an homage to her unique perspective on my creative potential over the years." I turned to lock eyes with Clara, whose face had turned nearly purple. But true vision lies in those willing to look closer and nurture unseen gifts, not suppress them, regardless of popular opinion. I smiled benignly. "Don't you agree, Aunt Clara?" Her mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish under the weight of too many eyes and the hidden accusation in my words. For once it seemed Clara had no clever retort or searing glance to offer in return. I smiled wider. "I thought so. Cheers to fresh vision." "Then," I declared brightly, raising my glass. The crowd, oblivious to our true conversational undercurrents, echoed my toast eagerly, much to Aunt Clara's dismay. I stepped back to scrutinize my latest mural sketch, pencil smudges staining my hands. The city council had commissioned a stylized landscape to adorn the community center's remodeled facade. I wanted it to capture the neighborhood's vitality and cultural roots. As I reached for a rag to wipe the charcoal from my fingers, my phone vibrated loudly against the work table. I smiled involuntarily when I saw Uncle Max's face flash on the cracked screen. "Working hard as always," he exclaimed when I answered. His warm approval still caused a glow of pride to swell in my chest. "Just trying to do justice to the Irvington district," I replied, holding up my drawing to the light. "But it's getting there." "Well, make sure to take a break soon to eat," Max gently scolded. "We need to keep that brilliant artistic mind of yours fed, after all." I laughed. "I will, and thank you, Uncle Max." "You can thank me by letting me take you out tonight to celebrate properly," he insisted. "The whole family is getting together at Ambrosia, and I want to toast my world-famous niece." My smile faltered slightly. World-famous might be stretching it a bit, and honestly, I'd rather skip another tense family dinner if it's all the same to you. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I instantly regretted declining his sweet offer, but the idea of facing Aunt Clara and her scorn even now, months later, still made my stomach turn. The wounds from her resentment ran deep. Max cleared his throat gently. "Well, I understand if you're still feeling raw, but for what it's worth, Clara has been trying to make amends lately." I snorted in disbelief. "Clara doesn't do amends." "I'm serious," Max insisted. "She knows she behaved wretchedly. Don't you think she at least deserves a chance for old time's sake? I bit my lip, considering. The genuine entreaty in his voice gave me pause. And he had a point. Holding grudges had never been in my nature. I sighed deeply. Okay, I'll be the bigger person, but I'm not promising anything more than basic civility. Max chuckled, clearly pleased. That's all I ask. I'll swing by at 7 to get you. See you soon. I set down the phone with a reluctant smile. One tense dinner couldn't derail my newfound creative joy and confidence, and if Aunt Clara was genuinely ready to bury the hatchet, then maybe, just maybe, it was time I did too. After changing into a smart blouse and slacks, I gave my hair a final fluff in the hall mirror right as the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, sent up a quick prayer for patience, and went to greet my uncle. To my surprise, however, Aunt Clara's perfectly made-up face peered nervously at me instead when I opened the door. "Oh, good, you're home," she exhaled, clearly relieved. She smoothed her hands down her simple black sheath. "I was hoping we could talk privately before dinner." I stared wordlessly as a contrite Clara glanced at her heels. "May I come in?"